I met Emily in college, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was different from anyone I had ever met. She had an energy that filled every room she entered, a kind of magnetic pull that made people want to be around her. She was confident, sharp-witted, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people laugh or feel at ease. I, on the other hand, was more reserved. I wasn't socially inept or anything, but I was the type who preferred listening over speaking, planning over improvising. Where she thrived on spontaneity, I found comfort in structure. I liked knowing what was coming next, while she embraced the thrill of the unknown. Despite our differences, we got along almost instantly. I was drawn to her energy, and she seemed to appreciate my steady, grounded nature. We started as friends, spending late nights talking about life, dreams, and everything in between. She had big ambitions, a vision of herself as a successful woman who could carve out her own place in the world. She wasn't the type who dreamed of being a housewife. Emily wanted more, and I admired that about her. I wasn't the kind of guy to feel threatened by a strong woman. If anything, I found it inspiring. Our friendship naturally evolved into something deeper. She challenged me to step outside my comfort zone, and I gave her a sense of stability she never had growing up. She told me once that I made her feel safe, like no matter what happened, I'd always be there to catch her. And for me, Emily brought a sense of excitement to my life that I never realized I needed. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. She landed a job at a top marketing firm, while I started working my way up in an engineering company. We moved in together, and even though our work kept us busy, we made time for each other. Our personalities balanced each other out in a way that just made sense. Even in those early days, I knew I wanted to marry her. Not because she completed me, but because she complemented me. We weren't perfect, but we fit together in a way that felt right. And so, a few years later, I proposed, and she said yes. Marriage with Emily was never dull. She was the kind of person who thrived on movement, always chasing a new goal, planning the next big thing. I admired that about her. She wasn't someone who settled, and being with her meant that life was always in motion. After our wedding, we threw ourselves into our careers. I started my own engineering firm, a business I built from the ground up, while Emily continued her rapid climb in the corporate world. She had an almost relentless drive, always striving to be the best at whatever she did. And she was good, really good. People respected her, listened to her, followed her lead. She had a way of commanding a room, and I loved watching her in her element. Despite our busy schedules, we made time for each other. We took weekend trips when we could, had date nights, and celebrated each other's successes. Emily was passionate, full of life, and she pushed me to be better, to want more. She'd tease me for being too logical sometimes, too stuck in my ways, but I think she liked that about me. Where she was impulsive, I was measured. Where she was bold, I was patient. It worked. Over the years, we built a comfortable life together. We bought a beautiful house, traveled when we could, and enjoyed the little luxuries that came with financial stability. We didn't have kids, not because we couldn't, but because Emily wasn't sure she wanted them. She liked our freedom, the ability to pick up and go whenever we pleased. I never pushed the issue. As much as I liked the idea of a family, I loved Emily more. Our social life was mostly centered around her world. Emily had a large circle of friends, most of them ambitious professionals like herself. She thrived in social settings, effortlessly making connections and forming relationships. I, on the other hand, was more selective about who I let in. I had a few close friends, people I trusted deeply, but I never felt the need to be surrounded by people the way Emily did. She enjoyed attention, not in a vain or selfish way, but in the sense that she loved engaging with people, loved the energy of a room full of conversation and laughter. I always felt lucky to have her by my side. She made life feel exciting, like there was always something new on the horizon. And through all of it, I believed we were happy. At least, that's what I thought at the time. From the outside, Emily and I looked like the perfect couple. We were successful, financially stable, and had a relationship that people admired. Friends would tell me how lucky I was to have a wife like her, beautiful, intelligent, and driven. I agreed with them. I had built a life with a woman who turned heads, who knew how to make people feel important, and who could walk into any room and own it. Emily thrived in social settings. She had a natural ability to make people feel seen, to make them laugh, to make them want to be around her. I wasn't like that, but I never felt jealous or insecure about it. If anything, I enjoyed watching her shine. She made life feel bigger, fuller. At home, we were a team. We had our routines, our shared moments that were just for us. Sunday mornings meant coffee and reading in the kitchen. Friday nights were for takeout and a movie. We had inside jokes, little rituals that felt like they belonged to us alone. Even with our busy lives, we found ways to stay connected. That's not to say we were perfect. We had our differences. Emily was impulsive, sometimes reckless with money, while I was careful and deliberate. She thrived on excitement, always looking for the next big thing, while I found comfort in stability. She'd get frustrated with me for being too rigid, and I'd get annoyed when she made snap decisions without thinking them through. But in the end, we always found a way to balance each other out. One of the things I loved most about Emily was how fiercely independent she was. She never relied on me for her happiness, never expected me to take care of her in the way some people do in a marriage. She had her own ambitions, her own successes, and she took pride in them. I respected that. Looking back, I wonder if that independence, the very thing I admired in her, was also what kept us from truly being as close as I thought we were. Emily never needed me, not really. She loved me, I had no doubt about that. But there was a part of her that always felt just out of reach, like she belonged to the world more than she belonged to me. But I wasn't worried. We had been together for years. We had built something solid. Relationships evolve, people change, but I believed that what we had was strong enough to weather anything. After all, we were the perfect couple. Life with Emily had always been full of movement. She wasn't the kind of person to sit still for too long. She needed change, excitement, something to keep her from feeling like life was getting too predictable. I had always known this about her, and for the most part, I embraced it. But there were moments when I wondered if her restlessness would ever settle. It was during one of our usual Friday night dinners at home when she brought it up. We had just finished eating, and she was swirling the last bit of wine in her glass, looking at me with that thoughtful expression she had when something was on her mind. She told me she had been thinking about our marriage, about what it meant to be together for the long haul. She said she loved me, that she valued what we had, but that she had been feeling something was missing. Then, she said it. She wanted to try an open marriage. I remember the way my stomach dropped as soon as the words left her mouth. It wasn't anger that hit me first, it was shock. It wasn't a joke, she was serious. She talked about how we had been together for so long, how we were both still young and had so much life ahead of us. She told me that love and commitment didn't have to mean exclusivity, that exploring other experiences could make us stronger as a couple, not weaker. I barely spoke as she explained her reasoning. I just sat there, my mind racing, trying to process what I was hearing. This wasn't something we had ever talked about before. In all our years together, I had never once felt like Emily was unhappy with the way things were. I knew she craved excitement, but I had never thought that craving extended beyond us. When she was finished, she asked me what I thought. I told her no. There was no hesitation in my response, no doubt in my mind. I didn't need time to think about it, didn't need to weigh the pros and cons. Marriage, to me, meant commitment. It meant choosing each other, every day, no matter what. I wasn't interested in changing the rules of what we had built together. If she felt something was missing, I was willing to work on it, but not like this. Emily didn't argue. She didn't push. She simply nodded, let out a small sigh, and dropped the subject. We finished our wine in silence, and after that night, she never brought it up again. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, that she had accepted my answer, understood where I was coming from, and moved on. But looking back, I realize now that something changed after that conversation. She had asked for something, and I had denied her. And though she never said it outright, I could feel it, the quiet resentment, the subtle distance that started growing between us. I didn't know it at the time, but that night had set something in motion. And soon, Emily would decide to take what she wanted, whether I agreed to it or not. After that night, something in our marriage shifted. It wasn't obvious at first. There was no dramatic fight, no cold silence between us. If anything, Emily acted like nothing had changed at all. She was still affectionate, still engaged in conversation, still the woman I had spent years building a life with. But I could feel it, even if I couldn't put it into words. It was in the little things. The way she no longer reached for my hand when we watched movies together. The way she started spending more time on her phone, always tilting the screen away just slightly. The way she kissed me, still soft, still warm, but missing something I couldn't quite define. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid, overanalyzing things because of the conversation we had. She had asked for something, I had said no, and now I was reading too much into every little change in her behavior. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to trust her. But the signs became harder to ignore. Emily started going out more, work functions, happy hours, networking events. She had always been social, always had a reason to meet new people, but this was different. She didn't invite me along as much as she used to, and when I asked about her nights, her answers were vague. It was fine, she'd say, or just the usual people, nothing interesting. Before, she would tell me stories, laugh about the things that happened, share details about the people she met. Now, she kept things short, like she didn't want me to ask too many questions. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She was always on it, texting, scrolling, checking notifications. If I walked into the room, she'd lock the screen quickly, setting it face down on the table or tucking it into her pocket. When I asked who she was texting, she'd shrug. Just work stuff, she'd say. Nothing exciting. And then there were the nights she came home late. At first, it was just the occasional night out with coworkers. Then, it became a habit. I lost track of time, she'd say when she walked in after midnight, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. We were just talking, and I didn't realize how late it was. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. This was Emily, my wife, my partner, the woman I had built a life with. We had been through so much together. I had always trusted her, and she had never given me a reason not to. But that trust was starting to crack. Deep down, I knew something was happening. I just didn't want to admit it. Not yet. Emily's late nights became so frequent that I stopped keeping track. At first, I convinced myself that it was all in my head, that I was overanalyzing things because of the conversation we had about an open marriage. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became something was wrong. She was changing in ways that didn't make sense. She put more effort into her appearance than ever before, buying new dresses, lingerie, and perfume that I had never seen her wear for me. She started leaving the house earlier and coming home later, always in a rush to leave but never in a rush to return. There was an energy about her, a kind of excitement that didn't include me. At home, she was still affectionate, but only just enough to make me doubt my instincts. A kiss before bed, a smile across the dinner table, a quick, "I love you," before walking out the door. If I hadn't been paying attention, I might have believed that nothing had changed. But I knew my wife. I knew the way she used to look at me, and this wasn't it. Her touches felt rehearsed, her words automatic, as if she was performing a role rather than actually being present with me. She was careful, but not careful enough. I started noticing things she didn't think to hide, the way she was always on her phone, how she subtly turned the screen away when I walked by, the way she started putting it on silent when we were together. Emily had always been private, but this was different. It was secrecy, and I could feel it. One night, she told me she had a work dinner, another one of those endless networking events that now seemed to consume most of her time. She left the house at 6, looking stunning in a dress I had never seen before, her makeup applied with extra care. I watched her from the doorway as she got into her car, my stomach twisting. By midnight, she still wasn't home. I sent her a message, asking if everything was okay. No response. At 1:30 a.m., I texted again. Still nothing. She finally walked in at almost 3 a.m., her heels clicking against the floor, her makeup slightly smudged. She barely looked at me as she mumbled something about losing track of time. Her phone was clutched tightly in her hand, and she went straight to the bathroom to shower. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The next morning, I asked her casually about the event. She gave me vague answers, barely lifting her eyes from her coffee. When I asked who was there, she shrugged and said, "The usual people." When I asked for the name of the restaurant, she hesitated for just a second before saying it was a place downtown. That wasn't an answer. That was an escape. Something in my chest tightened as I realized what was happening. I didn't have proof, but I didn't need it yet. The inconsistencies in her stories, the perfume that lingered on her when she came home, the way she guarded her phone like it held a secret, these were things she wasn't even aware she was revealing. I started paying closer attention, not in an obvious way, but just enough to start putting the pieces together. I wasn't going to accuse her without evidence, but I knew now that my instincts had been right all along. I wanted to believe that Emily was still the woman I had married, that she wouldn't betray me, that she wouldn't throw away everything we had built together. But belief alone wouldn't change the truth. I just didn't know what that truth was yet. The distance between us grew wider with each passing day. I stopped asking her questions because I already knew she would lie. She stopped offering explanations because she could sense that I didn't believe them. It became an unspoken game. She would disappear for hours, sometimes whole nights, and I would pretend not to notice. But I did. I noticed everything. The smell of cologne on her clothes that wasn't mine, the way she'd come home freshly showered as if washing away any trace of where she had been, the unexplained credit card charges at restaurants we had never been to together. It was all piling up, but I still had no solid proof. And without proof, I had nothing. The tension between us was thick, but neither of us acknowledged it. She still smiled at me, still kissed my cheek before leaving for work, still played the role of a loving wife when it was convenient. But there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, where I caught glimpses of the truth. A certain nervousness when she saw me glancing at her phone, a hesitation before answering even the simplest questions, the way she no longer looked me in the eye when she said, "I love you." Those words had once meant everything. Now they felt hollow. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Her lies were lazy, thrown together with little effort. If I asked what time she got home the night before, she would pause for a second too long before answering. If I asked who she had been with, she'd say, "Just work friends," but never name a single one. I could feel the cracks widening, the structure of our marriage barely holding together under the weight of her deception. The worst part wasn't even the possibility that she was cheating. It was the fact that she didn't seem to care if I found out. There was no guilt in her eyes, no remorse in her voice. It was like she had already moved on in her mind, like she was just waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to confront her. I wanted proof. I needed to be absolutely sure before I did something I couldn't take back. One night, while she was in the shower, I tried to check her phone. I had never done it before, had never felt the need to. But now, it was different. My hand shook as I picked it up, my heart pounding as I tried to guess the passcode. It didn't matter. The screen was locked with Face ID, and I knew she wouldn't be careless enough to leave any real evidence behind. I placed it back exactly where it was and sat on the bed, staring at the bathroom door, listening to the sound of running water. I knew I was close to the truth. It was just a matter of time before I found out. But I never expected that when the truth finally came, it wouldn't be Emily who told me. It would be my father. The day I found out the truth started like any other. I woke up, went to work, and tried to push aside the suffocating weight of suspicion that had been gnawing at me for weeks. I had no proof, just an overwhelming sense that something wasn't right. That changed with one phone call. It was mid-afternoon when my phone buzzed. My father's name flashed on the screen. He rarely called during the day, and the moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. His voice was tight, hesitant, like he was forcing himself to say the words. "I saw Emily, with your brother." The words hit me like a brick to the chest. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles turning white. "What?" My voice came out sharp, dangerous, but my father didn't flinch. He let out a heavy sigh, and then, with a voice filled with quiet rage, he told me everything. That morning, he had gone to visit an old friend on the other side of town. As he was leaving, he spotted a familiar car parked down the street, Emily's. At first, he thought nothing of it. But then he saw her step out of a house he didn't recognize. And she wasn't alone. She was with my brother. My father had pulled his car over, watching in stunned disbelief as my wife and my own flesh and blood stood there, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. He told me how my brother had his hand on the small of her back, how Emily leaned into him, how comfortable, how natural it all looked. Then, right there on the sidewalk, in broad daylight, she reached up, cupped his face in her hands, and kissed him. Not a mistake. Not a quick, guilty peck. A deep, slow, intimate kiss. Something inside me snapped. A blinding, searing rage unlike anything I had ever felt before took over. My body tensed, my breathing turned sharp and ragged. My own brother. My wife. The two people who should have had my back more than anyone else had been sneaking around behind it instead. My father kept talking, his voice carrying a mix of anger and disappointment, but I barely heard him. All I could see was red. Emily hadn't just betrayed me. She had humiliated me. She had walked all over me, lied to my face, and then had the audacity to not even bother hiding it properly. And my brother? The person I had grown up with, protected, trusted without question? He had thrown that trust away like it was nothing. For what? For her? My hands were shaking, my jaw clenched so tightly that it hurt. I barely remember hanging up the phone, But the moment I did, I slammed my fist down on my desk so hard that pain shot up my arm. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except what I was going to do next. Emily and my brother had taken everything from me. My trust, my marriage, my family. Now, I was going to take everything from them. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to destroy them. The rage that filled me after my father's call didn't fade. It burned hotter with every passing second. My marriage was a lie. My own brother had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. The two people who should have been the closest to me had been sneaking around, humiliating me behind my back, and they thought they could get away with it. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. They had no idea what was coming. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break down and beg Emily for answers. I wasn't going to ask my brother how he could do this to me. No, they weren't going to get the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. They had already stolen enough from me. Now it was my turn. That night, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, going over everything in my head. I had spent months doubting myself, questioning whether I was imagining things. I had given Emily the benefit of the doubt over and over again, but she had been playing me for a fool. And my brother? He was worse. He had looked me in the eye countless times, shared drinks with me, laughed with me, all while sleeping with my wife behind my back. They deserved to be crushed. I needed evidence. Solid proof. I wasn't going to confront them until I had everything I needed to ruin them both. I already had the advantage. Emily didn't know that I knew. That meant she would slip up, and when she did, I would be ready. I called my lawyer first. I didn't waste time explaining every detail, just the important ones. My wife was cheating, and I needed to make sure she walked away with nothing. He told me that I needed undeniable proof, something that couldn't be twisted or explained away. That was fine. I was more than willing to get it. Then, I started setting the trap. I told Emily I had an important business trip coming up, something last minute, something that would require me to be out of town for 2 days. I watched her closely as I said it, looking for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of guilt. She only smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she'd miss me. Lying came so easily to her. The second I walked out that door, she would go straight to him. I wasn't going anywhere, though. Instead, I made a few calls. A trusted friend lent me his car, so Emily wouldn't recognize mine. I reached out to a private investigator. Expensive, but worth every penny. If she was going to meet my brother, I wanted every detail documented. Time, place, photos. I wanted to see the moment when she thought she was in the clear, when she thought she had finally gotten away with it. The night before my supposed trip, I lay next to her in bed, listening to her steady breathing, feeling the warmth of her body beside mine. A body that she had shared with my brother. I felt nothing but disgust. I used to love her, used to believe we had something real. Now, all I could think about was how satisfying it would be to take everything away from her. By tomorrow night, she would no longer have a husband. By the end of the week, she would have nothing at all. The morning of my so-called business trip, I kissed Emily goodbye like nothing was wrong. She smiled sweetly, told me to have a great time, and promised to call me before bed. The way she lied so easily, so effortlessly, made my skin crawl. But I kept my face neutral, my voice calm. I wasn't going to tip her off. I left in my friend's car, driving away from the house as if I was headed to the airport. But instead of going anywhere, I parked a few blocks away and waited. I had hired a private investigator to track Emily, but I needed to see it for myself. This wasn't just about proof for the divorce, it was personal. I wanted to watch her betray me, to see just how deep her deception ran. It didn't take long. Less than an hour after I left, Emily walked out of the house, dressed up like she was going on a date. She looked excited, almost giddy. My stomach twisted with rage, but I forced myself to stay still, to stay focused. I followed her at a distance, my PI already stationed near my brother's apartment. She drove straight there. No hesitation, no looking around like she was worried about being caught. She pulled into his driveway like she belonged there, stepping out of the car with a confidence that made my blood boil. A few minutes later, my brother opened the door. He greeted her with a kiss, deep, familiar, like this was something they had done 100 times before. The investigator snapped photos from a parked car nearby, but I wasn't looking at him. I was staring at the two of them, at my wife and my own flesh and blood, standing there without a care in the world. My hands clenched into fists, my jaw so tight it hurt. This was beyond just an affair. This was betrayal at the highest level. They disappeared inside, and I knew what was happening without needing to see it. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my entire body shaking with rage. I could storm in right now, tear my brother apart, throw Emily's things out onto the street. But that would be letting them off easy. That would be giving them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. No, I wanted to hit them where it hurt. I forwarded the photos to my lawyer immediately. He confirmed that this was more than enough evidence to file for divorce under adultery, ensuring Emily would get nothing. No settlement, no alimony. She had built her life around the comfort my money provided, and soon, she would have none of it. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. Emily worked for my company, a position she had only gotten because I had pulled strings for her. She liked to act like she had earned it, but we both knew better. With a few calls, I arranged for her immediate termination. By the time she walked into work on Monday, she'd find herself locked out of the system, with security escorting her out of the building. As for my brother, I made sure he would regret this just as much as she would. He was financially unstable, always leaning on family to help him out. Not anymore. I cut him off completely, freezing out any financial or business connections he had through me. He had no idea yet, but his comfortable little world was about to collapse. By the end of the day, the wheels were in motion. Emily and my brother thought they were getting away with it. They thought they were smart, that I was blind, that they had one. But they had no idea the storm that was coming for them. I didn't go home that night. There was nothing left for me in that house. Instead, I stayed at a hotel, waiting for everything to unfold exactly as I had planned. I barely slept, running through every detail in my head, making sure there was no way either of them could escape the consequences of what they had done. By morning, the first domino fell. Emily called me, her voice sweet, pretending to check in on my trip. I let her talk, let her tell me how much she missed me, how she couldn't wait for me to come home. I wondered if she was lying in my brother's bed while she said it. The thought made my skin crawl. I didn't respond to her texts that day, and I didn't pick up when she called again. By the time she came home that evening, I was already gone. All that was left for her was a single envelope on the dining table, divorce papers. No explanation, no confrontation, just the cold, hard truth in legal form. The photos from the private investigator were neatly included in the file, undeniable proof of her affair. Her reaction was predictable. She called me over and over, sent frantic messages, trying to explain, trying to manipulate. I ignored every single one. That same night, she found out she no longer had a job. Security escorted her out of the building, her company email shut down, her access revoked. I imagined her standing outside in shock, realizing that the safety net she had relied on for years had just been ripped away. The next day, my brother found out he was completely cut off. No more help, no more contacts, no more support from me or our family. My father, disgusted by what he had done, told him to never show his face at any family gathering again. He called me once, probably expecting me to scream at him, to fight, to let him try to justify what he had done. I blocked his number before he could even get a word out. He was dead to me. Emily showed up at my office that afternoon, begging to talk. Security turned her away. She tried coming to my parents' house, hoping to get them on her side. My father refused to let her in. She had lost everything. For a long time, I had wondered what I would do if I ever found myself in this situation. Would I break down? Would I forgive? Would I let myself fall apart? But standing there, watching everything I had planned unfold, I realized I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I felt peace. Emily and my brother had made their choice. They had decided that their selfish desires were worth more than loyalty, than respect, than me. And now, they were left with nothing. I filed for divorce and never spoke to her again. I never spoke to my brother again, either. As far as I was concerned, they didn't exist. I walked away from the wreckage of my marriage without looking back. I wasn't the one who lost everything. They were. And I had no sympathy for them.